She wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She wasn't the name on the medals. But when war became a question of morality, not maps, everyone turned to the woman they'd once overlooked. This is the story of Colleen Walsh, the soldier they tried to forget, and the strategist the world couldn't afford to ignore. Colleen Walsh had always been the kind of woman who could dissolve into the background, not because she lacked presence, but because she had learned early that being seen wasn't always safe. Growing up as the middle daughter in a fiercely decorated military family meant that attention was currency, and Colleen? She was the one who spent it quietly, investing in observation rather than applause. Her father, Colonel Roy Walsh, was a man forged in command. Her mother, Marilyn Walsh, ran the household like an extension of the base: rigid schedules, pressed uniforms, conversations that never went deeper than surface-level concern. Her sister Erica, a year older and forever hungry for validation, had already built a legacy for herself. Top of her class at the academy, field-ready before graduation, decorated in her first deployment. Colleen? She was always the strategist, the girl with books instead of medals, curiosity instead of commands. And when she was accepted into West Point, no one celebrated. Her mother barely blinked. Her father's only remark had been, "We'll see, if you make it through." And she did. Quietly. Without asking for help, without making a spectacle. She rose rank by rank, never loud enough to be seen as a threat, but never still enough to be dismissed. It was during her second deployment that everything changed. Embedded in a tactical intelligence unit in Eastern Europe, Colleen began quietly crafting what would later become the backbone of the Eastern European defense doctrine. She'd mapped insurgent routes others missed, flagged misinformation pipelines that were sabotaging diplomatic efforts, and constructed a predictive model so precise it earned a nod from NATO command. But the credit? It went to a senior officer, a man who praised her supporting role during the doctrine's briefing and never mentioned her name once. She didn't speak up. Not because she lacked courage, but because she knew the game. She'd win nothing by shaking the table too early. Back home, Erica had just received her third medal for field valor. Their mother organized a celebration. Colleen wasn't invited. 3 months later, Colleen was approached by a quiet figure in a gray uniform. No name, just a request. A reassignment. Classified division. Strategic analysis. High-level clearance. She said yes. That decision took her into the belly of intelligence operations. Missions that would never be declassified. Victories that would never earn her medals. But she learned. She adapted. She made the hard calls, the ones generals couldn't see from their podiums. She signed orders others couldn't live with. And she carried it all in silence. It wasn't until Operation Candlestrike that she was forced into the spotlight. The situation had turned. A hostile zone. A drone feed flickering with heat signatures. A green light authorization for strike. But Colleen hesitated. "There are children," she said quietly into the comms. "Collateral," the voice answered. "No," she replied. "There's another way." She signed the override herself. The operation was altered, delayed by 90 minutes, and the children were extracted. But so was the enemy cell leader. It sparked outrage internally. There was an inquiry. Her father read about it in a redacted briefing. Erica, now stationed in North Africa, emailed a one-line message. "Reckless move." Colleen didn't respond. A year passed. At a NATO seminar in Brussels, Colleen gave a quiet presentation on post-conflict data gaps in asymmetric warfare. No applause. Just questions. One officer approached her afterward. "You ever think of teaching?" She shrugged. "I don't think I'm the kind people want to learn from." "You're wrong," he said. "You're exactly the kind." Wasn't until a leaked memo landed in her inbox, anonymous and damning, that she finally broke. It accused her of unauthorized operations. Leaking intel. It used phrases only someone close to her would know. The wording, the punctuation. Erica. The inquiry cleared her again, but something had snapped, not in anger, in resolve. Colleen requested reassignment to a shadow strategy division based out of Fort Campbell. She went underground, wrote the protocols others implemented, drafted emergency response sequences, taught young officers how to see a battlefield not just in lines, but in layers. No one clapped. No one called her a hero. But slowly, word spread. The Phi. Woman behind the doctrine. The ghost of Candlestrike. She's the one who... And so it began. Not a rise, but a reveal. Years later, when Erica was promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned a teaching role at the academy, Colleen sent her a gift. It was a book. Sun Tzu's Art of War, annotated. Inside, she'd written, strategy. Isn't about being first, it's about being right when it counts. Erica never replied. The regional strategy conference was announced 2 years after that. Colleen had just completed an embedded advisory stint with NATO in Kiev. She returned to D.C., back to her apartment filled with silence and redacted documents. The invitation arrived, not for her to attend, to keynote. The room would be filled with the very people who had once doubted her, questioned her. Forgotten her, she said yes. Then she picked up her phone, typed an email. To Leaders call Erica Walsh. Subject, conference RSVP notes. It's time to learn what you thought I didn't know. And so the battle changed. No longer for territory, but for visibility, for memory, for truth. And for the first time in her life, Colleen stood, not behind a screen, not beside someone else's legacy, but in front of a room ready to finally see her. The evening after the tribunal ended, Fort Campbell was uncharacteristically quiet. It had rained earlier. Now the asphalt steamed faintly under the amber glow of the perimeter lights. I stayed late in my temporary quarters, still in uniform, boots muddy and laces loose, staring at a stack of after-action reports I didn't remember pulling out. I hadn't spoken to my father since the hearing. Not even a text. Word traveled fast on base, especially about scandals that never made headlines. The tribunal had cleared me of wrongdoing but left a scar of questions. My clearance remained intact. My assignments did not. I was being transferred. Not officially demoted, that would imply guilt, but shifted quietly, out of public view, to a classified unit operating under the Strategic Command Initiative. I'd go from leading battlefield coordination to ghost planning missions that, if successful, no one would ever know about. At 4:30 the next morning, I received encrypted orders. A black vehicle met me at the northeast hangar. No insignia, no explanation. I boarded a C-40 transport with 2 other officers. One was asleep, the other reading a tattered copy of The Art of War. No one spoke. We flew east into a sunrise that felt like it belonged to someone else's story. Our destination was a nondescript underground facility in the Appalachian foothills. No GPS access, no digital records. You entered via a locked elevator inside an abandoned coal processing station. Inside, I met Director Thomas Arliss, a wiry, silver-haired analyst with a mind like a scalpel and a sense of humor that had long since been dissected away. "This isn't punishment, Major Walsh," he said, gesturing toward a bank of monitors showing live intel feeds from Syria, Poland, and the Congo. "This is the frontier." He handed me a file with no name, just a black triangle. Unit Echo 9. Think of us as the war room behind the war room. Echo 9 coordinated post-conflict intelligence strategies in regions where formal peace existed. On paper, but not in practice. Asymmetric environments, fractured leadership, rogue cells pretending at silence. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were cartographers of chaos. They'd been watching me for years, he said. My doctrinal papers, my field improvisations, even the override order that spared civilians in Mosul, the one that nearly ended my career. That decision, apparently, had caught their attention. I was given command of a 5-person cell. Each had a specialty: cyber infiltration, psychological ops, counterintelligence, on-ground logistics, and regional cultural analysis. No ranks, only roles. The cell's name was Sable. Our mission: deconstruct a shadow network called Greylight, a decentralized syndicate funneling mercenary assets and disinformation across disbanded war zones. Their operations were subtle, legal adjacent, and utterly invisible to conventional forces, and they had ties to our own. The first weeks passed in a blur of intercepted comms, decrypted contracts, and half-mapped schematics. My nights blurred, with long intelligence briefings and simulations. My only outlet was writing strategy notes in black ink, filling notebooks no one else read. I barely slept. I rarely ate full meals. But I was alive. More alive than I'd felt since West Point. Not because I was chasing power, but because for once I was the architect, not the footnote. Then came the leak. A ghost data trail surfaced during a routine server audit. It traced back to a procurement officer at Fort Drum, a man with a clean record and quiet politics. The message embedded in his encrypted files had only one line: Echo 9 is compromised. The implications were explosive. Not because of what he said, but because of who he said it to. Greylight. We didn't know what he'd given them, or for how long he'd been a mole. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. And the worst part, the file was dated 4 months before I was transferred to Echo 9, meaning someone higher up had known, and still brought me in. I confronted Arliss. You needed context, he said, unbothered. You needed to see the layers before peeling them. Now you're ready. That's when I realized this wasn't just an operation. It was a test. And maybe a trap. A week later, the Sable team intercepted coordinates tied to a philanthropic medical shipment, heading into a no-contact zone in northern Ukraine. We traced it back to Greylight's logistics hub. I reviewed the mission plan 3 times before I approved it. We weren't to engage, only observe, confirm the movement, and extract. But things rarely went according to plan. Our on-ground operative, codename Vireo, missed his extraction window. Last message read, shipment includes marked canisters, not medical, breached one, no vaccine inside, need immediate evac. And then, silence. Protocol demanded we consider Vireo a loss after 36 hours of radio blackout. But I overrode the rule. I authorized a covert retrieval team, violating cross-border protocols. Arliss didn't block me. He didn't support me either. The team returned. Vireo was alive. Barely. But the footage he carried showed more than canisters. It showed a briefing room, American flags on the wall, and Greylight's emblem projected beside NATO intelligence data. Someone in our own circle was sharing high-level strategy with a network that profited from disorder. The footage didn't show faces, just shadows and a familiar voice. Distorted, but recognizable. Erica Walsh. My sister. I froze. Logic demanded doubt. Deep fakes, altered audio, planted evidence. But gut instinct screamed familiarity. Not just her voice, but the cadence, the cold edge of clipped syllables. The last time I'd seen Erica, she'd been assigned to a counterinsurgency brigade in the Sahel region. She'd kept her distance, professional to a fault. Our relationship had stabilized, not healed. I requested access to her deployment logs. Redacted. I asked. Arliss for her recent comms. Denied. You're too close, he said. Compromise can't chase compromise. But I couldn't let it go. I started tracing my sister's assignments, building a silent map. Everywhere she'd gone, Greylight tendrils had followed. 3 months later, 6 months, even years. Was she a double agent, or was she being used? The only way to know was to confront her. But to do so would mean going outside the chain of command, outside the rules, again. So I planned a meeting under the guise of a NATO debrief in London. Erica accepted. We met at a secure safe house near Whitehall. She looked tired. Older. Her uniform hung looser, eyes sharper. Is this about Dad? She asked, barely seated. No, I said. This is about Greylight. Her pupils flinched. I placed the footage on the table. Hit play. She didn't look at the screen, just leaned back. I never joined them, she said. But I listened. Sometimes, that's all it takes to be guilty. My heart pounded. Why? She hesitated. Because no one in the room ever listened to me unless I had medals. Because the wars we fight now aren't clean. They're not about sides. They're about the cost of pretending there are still sides. And because, she paused, looked directly at me. Because I wanted to know what it felt like to be you. Invisible. But essential. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. Not anymore. The truth was, we were both fractured by the same machine. We just broke differently. I gave her the option. Come with me. Testify. Clear this. She shook her head. They won't believe me, but they might believe you. And just like that, she walked out. I never saw her again. I didn't report Erica. Instead, I compiled every operation I could that hinted at internal compromise. I didn't name her. I didn't destroy her. I exposed Greylight. I named others. Names with stars on their shoulders and fingerprints on civilian suffering. The hearings were private, classified, sanitized, but the impact wasn't. 2 generals retired early. 1 advisor resigned for health reasons. Greylight cells went dormant in 4 theaters. My reward? A new posting? Civilian liaison to NATO's Shadow Warfare Advisory Board. Not a promotion. Not a punishment. Just another place where I could exist. Quietly powerful. Invisibly essential. I never heard from Erica again. But one day, a sealed envelope arrived at my desk. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. 2 little girls in fatigues posing next to a West Point statue. And a note. Some shadows. Teach us how to stand in the light. I kept it in my drawer. Not for closure, for clarity. A month after the Greylight hearings concluded, after the flashbang of career consequences had simmered into whispers, I received a letter. Not an email. Not a phone call, a letter. Handwritten in my father's unmistakable script. Blocky, confident, overly controlled like a soldier marching even across the page. Colleen, I don't know if this changes anything. But I saw the footage. And I know you shielded your sister. You were braver than I taught you to be. Roy, he didn't sign it, Dad. He didn't apologize. But I read it 5 times in a single sitting. Not because of what it said, but because for once it sounded like he'd meant it. It was mid-March when NATO sent the invitation. A regional strategy conference. Civil-military integration for post-conflict zones. Subject, redefining shadow warfare. Intelligence in asymmetric environments. I wasn't just attending. I was the keynote speaker. I was also the only woman in the speaker lineup. There would be 62 commanders, 30 advisors, nearly 100 observers, and countless folded arms ready to dismiss or dissect me. I stared at the blinking cursor on the email's RSVP field, then typed 5 words in the notes section. It's time to learn what you thought I didn't know, and sent it to Lieutenant Colonel Erica Walsh, my sister. No warning, no preamble. Just that. The conference hall at Fort Campbell had been refitted for war of a different kind. Screens replacing sandbags, digital projections instead of drones overhead, uniforms crisp but distant. Backstage, I stood under the low hum of the projector. The banner above me read, Redefining Shadow Warfare, Intelligence in Asymmetric Environments. I ran my fingers across my notes, not because I needed them, but because they reminded me this moment was mine. When the lights dimmed and the audience quieted, I stepped onto the stage alone. No aid, no fanfare. Just a single pointer in my hand and 20 years of invisible scars on my back. I opened simply. Some missions never get a name. Some leaders never get a plaque. And some battles don't start at borders. They start where judgment replaces understanding. Silence, then shifting. Heads tilted, arms lowered. Some of those faces had once dismissed me. A general leaned to another, whispering, loud enough for me to hear, "That's the woman who wrote the Eastern European Defense Doctrine in 16. Voice didn't falter, but my chest burned. In the second row sat Erica, her posture precise, her eyes locked on mine. Her pen, poised but unmoving. This time, she wasn't here to challenge me. She was here to listen. Halfway through my presentation, I pivoted, literally. I walked across the stage, stopped in front of the main screen, and revealed a segment of Operation Candlestrike, one that had never been disclosed to public record. In 2018, I signed an override order in real time. It spared a hostile zone because intel suggested 7 children were trapped inside. Gasps. Not from drama, but from the clarity. That signature nearly cost me my career. I would do it again. I don't share this for sympathy. I share it because truth doesn't need forgiveness. It only needs to be seen. Silence thickened. Not the kind that pushes you off a stage, the kind that holds space. Because for the first time, they weren't just seeing a woman in uniform. They were seeing a leader who'd bled in places their systems wouldn't log. War is no longer just a matter of territory, I said. It is moral terrain. And leadership isn't about being right. It's about being ready to carry the weight of choice. When I turned to the side microphone to conclude, I didn't need a closing line. Instead, I offered a gesture. To conclude, I've asked Lieutenant Colonel Erica Walsh to share her reflections. As a next-generation officer, Erica stood slowly. She didn't stall. Her voice was firm, not flawless. Her eyes were wet, but her shoulders squared. I grew up thinking accolades were the end goal, that the person who stood tallest got heard. But today, I learned something else. That real honor is knowing who you can learn from and having the courage to admit it. The room rose. Not for me. Not for Erica. For something larger. The idea that strength could wear quiet. That leadership could be taught, even by someone we once tried to outrank. In the back row, my mother sat. She didn't clap, but she nodded. For the first time, it felt like approval, not of my uniform, but of my journey. A week later, I sent 3 invitations. One to my father, one to my mother, one to Erica. The location, our old family. House on the edge of Fort Campbell, the one I'd slept in for exactly one night after graduating West Point. This time, I arrived first. I set the table, took the seat at the head, the one my father had always claimed. When they walked in, no one said a word. My mother carried a dish wrapped in foil. Erica avoided eye contact. My father's face was unreadable. Once seated, I didn't offer pleasantries. I didn't call this dinner for apologies, I said. I called it to speak the truth. My truth, from my mouth. And so I did. I told them I hadn't quit the service. I'd been recruited into intelligence. I told them about being detained underground in Iraq, 3 days in darkness after a compromised extraction. I told them about ordering a shelling of a supply depot to save an Allied recon team, an order that left civilians wounded and me under inquiry for 8 months. I told them I'd declined a medal for a classified mission in Syria because accepting it would have fractured diplomatic trust. No one breathed. Then my father asked, almost a whisper, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because you never asked," I said. "And if you had, I don't think you would have believed me." It wasn't a wound, it was just the truth. My mother murmured, "I thought the care packages you sent were your way of saying sorry." "They weren't apologies," I said. "They were reminders that I still existed, even after I was erased from every family photo." Then I reached under the table, pulled out a manila folder, slid it across to Erica. Inside, a printed copy of the anonymous email that nearly ended my career. The one I now knew came from her. "I didn't keep this to incriminate you," I said. "I kept it to remind you that words, even unseen, can wound deeper than weapons." No one interrupted. I didn't ask for redemption. "If we're going to move forward," I said finally, "it starts by acknowledging the person you chose not to see." Erica walked to my side, placed her hand on my shoulder. No words. My father rose, walked to the shelf, and picked up an old family photo, a barbecue from years past. "This one's missing someone," he said. "We'll take a new one." I didn't smile. I just nodded. Not because I had forgiven them, but because I no longer needed to hold what hurt. Back in DC, my life resumed. I worked part-time as a strategic advisor for NATO, reviewing asymmetric models, analyzing simulation, data. I still lived alone, still woke at 5:30, still wrote in black ink, but once a month I returned to Fort Campbell to teach a course on soft strategy in the age of non-traditional combat. Erica never missed a session. She sat in the front row, asked the hardest questions, debated, pushed, listened. One afternoon, she handed me a thin binder, a training reform proposal based on strategies I'd taught. "I don't need your signature," she said. just your thoughts. I wrote one word on the cover: advance. Our family had no portrait, but the next time I looked at the one on the mantle, I was in it. Not replaced, not erased, just seen. The lecture hall at Fort Campbell smelled of sharpened pencils and new cadets, so different from the sterile, steely scent of strategy rooms in DC. Yet somehow this room was more alive. I'd returned for my monthly session. Soft strategy and moral terrain in non-traditional combat. It was voluntary. Cadets didn't earn credits or promotions from attending. But the room was always full. At the back sat an older captain next to a nervous 22-year-old fresh from basic. One scribbled everything I said. The other just watched me like I might shatter the ground beneath them with a word. In the front, Erica, never late, never distracted. Still a lieutenant colonel, but now the one others looked toward when unsure of how to move forward. Today's topic was brutal. When do you let civilians die? I gave them no answers, only questions. Because war, I told them, is not a series of instructions. It's a series of consequences you learn to live with. When I asked who would choose the village over the convoy, only 3 hands rose. Erica's was one of them. Explain, I said. Because command is less about preserving plans than about preserving meaning, she answered. And a decision that saves more lives on paper may cost us the war in spirit. She didn't blink as she said it. My chest warmed, not because she quoted me, but because she finally believed it. That evening, a note slipped under my door. Typed. Anonymous, but distinct. Ma'am, I come from a family who thinks war is for men. But today, I learned that integrity doesn't salute gender. It salutes wisdom. Thank you for being who you are. There were more after that. Some emailed, some mailed. One cadet left a hand-drawn sketch of me mid-lecture. I didn't keep them for pride. I kept them because they reminded me that influence wasn't loud. It echoed in the quiet choices people made when no one was watching, and that sometimes survival wasn't measured by wounds, but by the stories others told after you left the room. I turned 42 the following month. No party, no celebration. I didn't mark the day. But as I returned to my apartment after an unusually late simulation debrief in Arlington, I found a plastic cake container on my doormat. Inside, a small chocolate cake with blue icing, 3 words written unevenly on top. General, sister, teacher, no note, no name. But I knew who it was from. I carried it to the kitchen, didn't even bother for a plate. I cut a sliver, stood at the counter, and ate it in silence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own life. Weeks later, a request landed in my inbox, not from NATO or Fort Campbell, but from a civilian think tank. In Boston, a public symposium titled Invisible Architects, Women Behind Strategic Doctrine. They wanted me to deliver the keynote. I almost declined. The title made me itch. I hadn't built strategy for applause, and I certainly hadn't done it for gender. But Erica called me that night. First time in months she initiated. Take it, she said. People need to know the map makers too, not just the ones holding flags. She was right. I agreed. Not for them. For the cadet who called me teacher. For the general who whispered I was wrong. For my father, who had finally started telling his golf buddies what I actually did. And for me. Because maybe I finally believed that not being visible didn't mean I was never there. When I visited the old family house again, a rare, delicate truce now forming in annual rhythms, I noticed something new above the fireplace. It was a framed photo, the 4 of us, my father, my mother, Erica, and me. No medals on the table, no name tags, just wine, mismatched chairs, and soft smiles. Not posed, just captured. Beneath it, a tiny brass plaque. The Quiet War. My father said nothing about it. Neither did my mother. They didn't need to. At the end of my final spring lecture that year, a young cadet with freckled skin and a stiff posture lingered behind. He was barely 23. Ma'am, he asked nervously, in war, what's the hardest part? I didn't pause. Surviving without becoming a statue, I said. Not turning your wounds into weapons. remembering your purpose, not just your scars. He nodded, though I wasn't sure he understood it yet. He would. One day, in a tent or a tribunal or an email thread marked classified, he'd know exactly what I meant, and if I was lucky, maybe he'd choose quiet strength over loud certainty. Maybe that summer, NATO released a special issue of its annual Doctrine series. For the first time in its 40-year publication history, the front article was authored by a woman. Title: The Weight of Command, Moral Terrain in Post-Conflict Operations. Author: C. Walsh. No full name, no rank, just initials. I smiled when I saw it, because legacies don't need titles. They just need truth and time. On a quiet July evening, I took a walk behind the Fort Campbell barracks, the sun brushing everything in orange haze. Erica joined me. No uniforms. Just two women in worn boots and quiet breaths. You ever wonder, she asked, how it might have turned out if we'd gotten it right sooner? All the time, I replied. But maybe we got it right exactly when we needed to. She nodded. We sat on the same fallen log where I once debated leaving the service for good. This time, we stayed in silence. Not from discomfort, from peace. At the Pentagon Hall of Intelligence Operatives, there's a wall. Most walk past it, no photos, no bios, just blank steel and a single line etched into the center. Some of the most important choices are made by those who go unseen. I never asked for my name to be there. But sometimes when I visit, I see a fresh flower placed beneath it. And once I found a note tucked between the steel and the base. I joined because of you. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Because my story, our story, was never about being remembered loudly. It was about being understood, and in the quiet, I finally was.